Welcome, and we will start off with bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And let's go to the shir. And we are looking at the Song of Songs, Shir Hashirim, and Rashi's interpretation of that, which he bases heavily on midrashic interpretation and understands basically the way the rabbis understood this work as being a metaphor for the drama and the love. It's like a romantic drama between God and the Jewish people. That's how, and so that's how he interprets these words. So here we go. Third chapter, verse 3, chapter 1. L'reach shmanecha tovim, right? Your oils are good, or the fragrance of your oils are good. Shemen turak shemecha, your shemecha could be your name, right? Shem, right? Shemen turak means poured out oil, poured out. And again, name could imply reputation, something like that. It, yeah, I don't think it could be your oils, even though notice Shemen and Shemecha look very similar. I think it would be Shamecha if it would be oils. So I'm going to translate that, but we'll see. We'll see how Rashi works with this, and I hope you'll find that interesting. Finishing up the verse, Alkain, for that reason, Alamot ahevucha. The maidens love you, love you. Let's take a look at Rashi. L'reach shmanecha tovim, right? The syntax here is difficult for me, right? Because literally it means to the or for the fragrance of your oils are good. So that's literally translating that. So here's how he translates it. It's beautiful. Shem Tov, a good name, a good reputation. Nikra al Shem Shemen Tov. It is referred to by good oil, fragrant, fine oil. And a person's reputation is so significant and so important, and doing things, of course, that ruin a person's reputation, doing that to yourself is a terrible, terrible thing. And that's another reason why Motzi Shem Ra, one who gives a bad name, a bad reputation to someone, is as if it's considered a terrible sin. And the trouble is, it's so easy to commit. And giving a person a bad reputation, I've come to the conclusion, is in a way as killing their soul. So here we go. So now he goes on back to the verse. L'reach shmanecha tovim, right? According to or for the fragrance of your oils are good. Sheherichu bahem afse aretz. What it's saying is that the ends of the earth have inhaled them. Inhaled them. What do we mean? Again, speaking very metaphorically, Asher shamu shimacha hatov, in that they have heard the good reports of you. They've heard a good report of you. Ba'asotcha noraim b'mitzrayim, right? So it could be, if this sounds almost like it's talking about God here, but because here it says, in your performance of awesome acts in Egypt. So we could be addressing God here, right? So we'll see. Shemen turak, oil is poured out. Nikra shimcha liyot ne'emar alecha, right? Your reputation, right? Your name is called on, or is referred to. Liyot, to be. Ne'emar alecha, stated about you, ata shemen asher turak. So we'll work on this, right? Ata would be you, shemen asher turak, the oil which is poured out tamid, constantly, liot reach arev, to be a pleasing fragrance, shelcha, of yours. So we'll have to try, and I mean, I initially honestly felt that this was referring to Israel, but we'll have to play with it and see as I'm looking carefully at the Rashi, right? So, I mean, essentially, even though the syntax has been very tortured, essentially it's saying, that people have heard of your reputation and they're blown away by it. Excuse me 1 second. Thank you. Okay. Shelcha yotze lemerachok. It goes out to a great distance. Shechein derech shemen arev, because this is what happens. This is the way of pleasing oil, bechol eight, at any time, shehu betzluchit, that is to say, at a time when it's in the vial or in the jar, chatuma, that's sealed, ein recho nodef, its fragrance does not waft. Potcha, right? But if you open up this jar, open up this vial, umerik, and you empty it, shmana lechi, its oil, you empty out its oil into a vessel, acher, another vessel, recho nodef, its fragrance wafts. So this is a deep theory as to an explanation. First of all, that we look at our patriarchs, essentially, especially Abraham, and how he journeys. He's essentially a nomad who journeys around different places. And the idea is this could be referring to Abraham. He was a person whose reputation, was all over the place because of his wanderings. Then, on the other hand, we say Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, that the acts of the patriarchs are in a way a sign for the children, for the descendants, and likewise one can understand the terrible experience of the destruction of the temples and the subsequent exiles of the Jewish people as a way in which God's reputation, in other words, the degree to which the Jewish people acted righteously and were God believers, etc., that in that way, in a sense, the fragrance of such behavior could waft out far and wide. And that's a reason why the Jewish people went into exile. Going on with the verse. Al kain alamot ahevucha. For this reason, the maidens are in love with you, have loved you. So he gives examples. Ba Yitro, so is an example. Jethro, right, who was a Midianite priest, he came lekol hashmuah, when he heard this. The literally kol means the voice of the shmuah is like news, right? Tidings. V'nitgayer, and he himself became a member of the Israelite people. He converted. Of Rachav, and likewise, Rachav, Rahab Hazonah, the prostitute, right? And that's in Joshua. Rachav was the woman who hid the two spies that Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Amra, she said, and this is, you can check out the book of Joshua, chapter 2. If you've never read the story, it is a totally cool story, okay? So this is what she said. Ki sham'anu, we have heard, et asher hovish, how, etc., how God has put to shame these other nations. But al yedechen, and by means of this, and this is apparently also in Joshua 2, she says, Ki Hashem Elohechem, for the Lord your God, hu Elohim bashamayim. He is the God of the heavens. In other words, acknowledging the supremacy of Hashem, of Adonai. alamot, right? The maidens. Betulot, right? Literally, it means either young women or virgins. Lefi, and because lefi shahadibur dimho lebachur, because the scripture has compared him, likened him to a bachur, to a young man, she o ahuvato mechavavto, whose lover, right, the one who loves him, uh, Mechavto again has to do with treating him tenderly and lovingly. Ulefi hadugma, and according to this metaphor, ha'alamot, the maidens, hein ha'umot, we're referring now to the other nations. So understanding alamot as being the nations of the world. So again, it's interesting because this would be the first time in my reading of the Song of Songs, and I've read it a number of times, that I'm understanding this verse, if I'm understanding it correctly, that it is actually referring to God, right? And in fact, it makes sense. So, go over it, go over it, go over it. And, you never know what new insight you get. Because if we go back to the very first verse, as you can see, I'm scrolling up to that very first verse. It says, let him kiss me with kisses of his mouth. For your love is better than wine. And the your there this is referring to God, right? This is like the Israelites, the Jewish people, addressing God and saying, let him kiss me with kisses of the mouth. And of course, we understand by that actually a reference to divine inspiration, divine revelation, etc. So the verse is, of course, just simply continuing in terms of addressing God in this particular way. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts, this is a good time since we just finished the verse out for this. So if you'd like to express any thoughts, I'm happy to hear. Otherwise, I will continue. We'll take another verse. Moshcheni acharecha narutza. Draw me after you. Again, continuing to address God, right? The Jewish people addressing God. Draw me after you, Narutza. We will run. We will run. Heavy ani. I need to go on to the next verse before I can explain. Hamelech chadarav. The king has brought me into his chambers. Nagila v'nismacha vach. We will rejoice and be happy in you. Naskira dodecha, we will remember your love. Miyayin, more than wine. Mesharim ehavucha. So mesharim would be the upright, quite possibly. Yashar means straight, right? The righteous or the straight. Ahevucha are your lovers, right? Have loved you, something like that. So again, the language is not the easiest. The Hebrew itself isn't the easiest Hebrew for me to understand, but I'm trying to do the best I can without actually referring directly to a translation, right? So, mashcheni acharecha narusa. Draw me after you, we will run. Ani shamati ishluchecha, right? I have heard. So Rashi is paraphrasing this, right? I have heard mishluchecha from your emissary, from your messenger. Remez, an allusion, a hint, she'amarta lemoshcheni, that you said to draw me. V'ani amarti acharecha narutza. So so the idea here, so just to finish the translation, and I said, or I thought, I will run after you, liot lacha leisha, to become your wife. The point of this is that there was as it were, a mere reference, a mere suggestion, right? That's the remez, right? That the prophet gave a suggestion that God wanted to draw near to us, right? Draw us near to him, I should say. And I was ready to run. In other words, the contrast of just the slight invitation and the eagerness with which that invitation was accepted. Havi Aini, he brought me, right? Let's keep going on here. Hamelech Chadarav, the king has brought me into his chambers. V'gam hayom hazeh, and this day as well, this day, Odena li gila v'simcha, I still have joy and pleasure and happiness, asher nidbakti bach, in that I tried to cling to you, inasmuch as I clung to you. Naskira dodecha, we will remember your love. Gam hayom, even today, ba'almanut chayot, right, or chayut, right? Even in this living widowhood. Remember, if you were here for the introduction, you just have to go back a couple of lessons and you'll see in his introduction, Rashi talks about this, that in exile, the Jewish people are like a living widow. They feel widowed because the temple has been destroyed. The level of closeness has been severed. The fact that they no longer are in their homeland, they're no longer in the house, they've been cast out. So they're like living a widowhood, all right? And the grief that they are feeling, and that Solomon, even though in the midst of his successful reign, etc., having constructed the temple, etc., foresaw that this was going to happen. So in this particular verse, he's making reference to that, and he says, Tamid askir dodecha. I will always remember your love, Harishonim, your early love. Mikol mabat. Looks mishte oneg, right? More than any mishte would be a banquet, a pleasing banquet, v'hasimcha, v'simcha, or any joyous occasion. That the idea of being close to God is something that at which my heart leaps more than anything else, even simply in its remembrance, even though I'm not experiencing it anymore. So, right. So I didn't finish the verse. Meyayin more than right. Excuse me. I did. Right. More than wine. Meisharim ahevucha. Right. The righteous have loved you. Here, Meisharim ahevucha. Ahava azah ahavta. Right. Mishor. So I'm looking to see whether this is ahavat mishor. So ahava azah would mean powerful love, strong love. Ahavat mishor could be the love of righteousness, bli akeva, without any impediment or rechasim. Rechasim are like rough places. So he says, this appears to be an editorial insert here. Lashon pasuk. This is the language of the verse from Isaiah chapter 40, where he says that's where Isaiah talks. The whole book changes its sense. It seems sometimes referred to as Isaiah 2, and there it says, "V'haya akov lemishor," and the crooked will become straight. V'harechasim levika, and here it means the rough places to a valley, right? So basically, Isaiah is using a metaphor of building a highway to God. Isaiah is saying that all the impediments that the Jewish people are experiencing in that relationship with God will all be smoothed out, so that, in a sense, metaphorically, there's now this close and loving relationship with God, as if you've gotten to God by a highway. Asher ahevucha, right? So those who have loved you, ani va'avotai, so I and my ancestors, Ba'otan hayamim, in those days, zehu pshuto lefi inyano, that is what it's referring to. So in other words, he's talking here about himself and his ancestors at one time, right? Ulefi dugmato, but understanding this as a metaphor, Haim mis maskirim lefanav. They remind him, or they bring to his attention, chesed neurim, the love of their youth, ahavat klulot, their pure love, lechtem acharav bamidbar, when they went after him in Egypt. In other words, Jeremiah actually is the one who makes this reference and describes the love and righteousness of the Jewish people after they were freed from slavery in Egypt, that they follow God into this desert. Eretz Tzia, a dry land, Vitzalmavet, we could translate that as, dangerous, the shadow of death. Begam Tzeda lo asu, nor did they prepare sufficient victuals, sufficient food, lahem for themselves. Veheminu bo, and they had this faith in God, uvishlucho, sorry, and in his emissary, in other words, in Moses. They had enough trust in God and the one God sent, i.e. Moses, the lo amru, and they did not say at that time, hey, ach neitzei lamidbar, how is it possible for us to go out into the wilderness? Lo makom zera, it's not a place of seed, or mezonot, or food, v'halchu acharav, and they went after him, v'hu hevi'am latoch chadrei hekef ananav, and there's a tradition that God surrounded them with clouds of glory. In other words, clouds of glory is another way of describing the divine presence, right? Hekef, surrounded by his cloud, bezo odam hayom galon, and he says, uh, I believe, so through this odam hayom, to this day, galim usmechim. So I think here he means they are rejoicing, usmechim, and they're still happy in him. Aflafi aniyam b'tzaratam, despite their poverty and their distress. Umishta and they take delight b'Torah, in the Torah. V'sham maskirim dodav, and there they mention his love, his acts of love, miyayin, more than wine, umeshur ahavatam oto, and the righteousness of their love for him. So again, understanding that the study of Torah can be more delightful than any other things that people see as pleasurable, like drinking wine, like going and drinking wine, that the study of Torah actually is even more enjoyable and more delightful than that. And I don't think it's a trite thought at all. And I'm going to pop in the marking here, and we'll go to here. And also, I hope to mark the place. There we are. Going to stop the share. And if any of you have any thoughts or comments about what you're experiencing in this particular study that we have.
I think the Song of Songs is so difficult with the metaphors. It's hard to learn, to understand it. And they got out of Egypt, okay, but then again, they didn't do good for the God, the golden calf, and we're a stiff-necked people. A lot of times they wanted water, so they did the wrong thing again. They did the wrong thing a lot of times. I don't know why the Jewish people won't obey God's commandments.
So what we're doing is compartmentalizing, okay? We're looking at the act of the Exodus itself at that moment when the Jewish people followed Moses and God, right? And we're focusing on the compartmentalizing things and saying, at that particular moment, this was a wonderful, wonderful act, loving act at the time. The problem, of course, is we're not consistent. Human beings are not consistent. And unless you really train yourself to be consistent, you can be in love with someone and then something happens and you're fighting. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's, at least that's my experience. And sometimes the more you love a person, the more upset you can get. So here we're dealing with something initial, that initial moment when the Jewish people followed God. But we only just started the book. The book has a number of chapters. It's talking about the drama, and it's talking about the fact that the Jewish people also, at points, acted extremely faithlessly. But right now, we're setting it up as this initial wooing and act of love, and the idea that the Jewish people, despite their low position, and for many, many centuries and in many places, they held a very low position and were abused and treated as third-class citizens, etc., that nevertheless, they look back on this with great deal of affection and pleasure. Alex, please.
Yeah, I actually want to follow up the last study we had mentioned about the multitude that was with them and other people. They go, Balak, Balaam. Oh, we see you got the guy. He is it. But I'm going to stick with my guy, even though he's been working, and that's who we use back in my hometown with their local gods. So that's a bit in line with that too. I mean, that's humanity right there. I'm going to stick with the junk I'm using.
Yes, that's true. It's true. But then on the other hand, there are those who've chosen and seen for themselves. And, it was so interesting that Rashi chooses on the one hand a priest from Midian, and on the other hand a prostitute. Perhaps the very first prostitute with a good heart. Okay. I will end this with one of my favorite stories. I do not know if it has any rabbinic origin or if it's a relatively modern story, but it is one of my favorite stories, and it's apropos, Alex, of what you were saying. So the story goes, and this is a tradition, that both Abraham and Sarah would offer hospitality. Their tent was open on all four sides, which is the chuppah, the marriage canopy, the idea of hospitality, of even welcoming strangers. That was the idea. And Abraham would treat strangers. And of course, we've got the famous story of the three angels, etc., and that they would welcome them. And then afterwards, they'd get into a discussion. And the person would say to Abraham or to Sarah, thank you for this wonderful meal that you provided. And Abraham would say, well, you don't need to thank me, because ultimately it's the one who created me and led me who provided. So that's who we really need to thank. And very often in this way, Abraham and Sarah were able to draw people away from paganism and to recognize, the ultimate source and transcendent source of creation and everything. One day, this old man shows up, and after the meal, after Abraham, gives him a chance to refresh himself, gives him a wonderful meal. This old man takes out his idol and starts thanking his idol. And Abraham is absolutely blown away at this person in his home, idol worshiping. And he gets so upset and he says, what are you doing? This is wrong. And the old man says, my dad worshiped the idol. My grandfather worshiped this idol. I'm going to worship this idol. And Abraham is so upset, he throws this man out of his tent. A few moments later, God appears to Abraham, says, Abraham, what just happened? And Abraham saying, God, this man insulted you, your reputation, your name. He worshiped an idol right there in my home. And God says to Abraham, he says, listen, I've been tolerating this guy for 89 years. You couldn't tolerate him for 89 minutes.
Wonderful. That's pretty good.
It's one of my favorite stories. I'm going to stop the recording at this point.